Hello Year 3, I'm going to read the next two chapters of the Akimbo Adventures for you this afternoon. So we've already heard chapters 1 and 2 and today we're going to hear 3 and 4. So let's crack on. Chapter 3, and here is my beautiful bookmark that George very kindly made for me as a Christmas present. Thank you, George. Chapter 3 is called Stolen Ivory. Over the next few days, Akimbo found himself thinking more and more about the baby elephant. He wondered whether it had been picked up by another member of the herd or whether it had been left to die. Had the poachers destroyed 2 elephants in their cruel and greedy hunt for ivory? He knew that his father and the other game rangers were doing their best to stop the hunters, but they seemed unable to deal with them. If I were in charge, he said to himself, I'd catch them and teach them a lesson. If nobody else will, then I am going to stop them. He thought about this. There was no reason why the poachers should get away with it. Perhaps there was something he could do after all. Where do the poachers come from? He asked his father one evening. His father shrugged his shoulders. From all over the place, but we know that there's one gang in the village nearby. We can't prove it, but we think they're doing it. What do they do with the tusks? Akimbo asked. His father sighed. They hide them. Traders come up from the towns and buy them from them. Then they smuggle the tusks back to town, and that's where they're carved. But they make them into necklaces and ornaments. But don't you ever catch any of them? Sometimes. Then we hand them over to the police, but the poachers are cunning and clever as well. Akimbo turned away. I'm clever too, he muttered under his breath, and I'm sure I can be as cunning as they are. What was that? His father asked. Nothing, Akimbo replied, but he had declared war on the poachers the moment he saw that baby elephant waiting in vain for its mother to get up. Akimbo knew that it would be impossible for him to do anything about the poachers in the reserve itself. The poaching gangs travelled by night. They were armed. Then they struck as quickly and as quietly as possible before fading away into the bushes again. Every so often the rangers picked up the tracks and pursued them, but usually they were too late. He thought of different plans, but none of them seemed likely to work. If there was no point in his waiting for the poachers, why not go to the village and find them? That was one way to get the proof he would need to stop them. At the edge of the rangers' camp there was a storeroom. Akimbo had been inside only once or twice, as it was always kept locked, and his father was rarely in there. In there were things which the rangers confiscated from poachers when they managed to find them. It was a grim collection. There were cruel barbed wire traps designed to tighten like a noose around the animal's legs while it stepped into the concealed circle of wire. There were rifles, spears, and ammunition belts. But what was the saddest of all were the parts of the animals which had been caught by the poachers. As well as horns and skins, there were the most sought-after trophies there were the most sought-after trophies of all, the tusks of elephants. Many of these things were kept to show visitors so that they could see what the poachers did. Some were also kept in the hope that they would be needed as evidence once the poachers were caught. But that seemed to happen so rarely that the tusks and the traps just gathered more and more dust. That night, at the time when the rest of the camp was asleep, Akimbo slipped out of his room and made his way across the compound towards the storeroom. In the moonlight he could make out the shape of the storeroom against the night sky. He paused in the shadows for a few moments to check that nobody was around, and then he darted along the path to stand in front of the storeroom door. His father's bunch of keys was heavy in his pocket. He had slipped it out of the pocket of his father's working tunic while his parents were busy in the kitchen. He had felt bad about that, but he told himself that he was not stealing anything for himself. Now he tried each key in the storeroom lock. It was a slow business. In spite of the moonlight, there was still not enough light to see clearly, and it was difficult to keep those he had already used from being jumbled up with the ones with the ones which he was yet to try. At one point, he dropped the whole bunch, and it made a loud, jangly noise, but nobody woke up. At last, the lock moved. With one final twist, the bolt slid home. Akimbo pushed open the door and wrinkled his nose as he smelled the familiar rotten odour of the uncured skins. But it was not skins that he had come for. There, in the corner, was a small elephant tusk, which had been roughly sawn in 2. Akimbo picked this up, checked that it was not too heavy to carry, and took it out of the storeroom. He took off its label. Then, Locking the door again, he crept away, just like a poacher, making off with his load of stolen ivory.